We have our first batch of Utah win totals for 2024. So, how many games will the Utes win? Let's discuss on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media, where you can follow our show at Locked On Utes on X. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business, and that's what LinkedIn is for. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. There's a sponsor of our episode today, so post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. That's all caps, no spaces. Locked On College terms and conditions do apply. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department, and on today's show, excited to be joined by the Deseret News' Ryan McDonald to talk about win totals for 2024. It's never too early, Ryan. We haven't even gotten to March Madness yet. We got to talk about this. We are going to get to some madness occurring in February, not March, with the men's basketball team. Also talk about the spring captains in a moment, but got to start with Big 12 win total projections were put out by the sportsbook.com. Josh Furlong was the one who tweeted this out, so originally alerting us to the fact that these were available, because I apologize to the sportsbook.com. I was not familiar with their work until I saw these win totals posted, but I think it's always interesting to talk about. So Utah is listed at 9.5. For me, I would take the over there and feel good about it, but I'm curious with you. We can talk about where the losses and everything may fall on the schedule. When you look at that 9.5 number, would you go over or under?
You know, I've learned to always trust the books, and I get this far out in advance. This far out in advance is hard to do, but as I was looking at the schedule, I was and yeah, we can go through that. I was kind of thinking, the first 8, 9, yeah, I see a lot of wins in there, but then down the stretch, we'll kind of see. So I was thinking, 9, 10, 11, somewhere it's hard for me to think that Utah might get out of there with just one loss, but maybe they get out of there with just one loss. So you're looking at 11. So yeah, I think kind of right in that 9 to 10 range feels pretty darn good to me. So yeah, I think that 9.5 is right on a pretty intriguing number as far as putting money on 9.5.
I think it's a really good number. I mean, if it was 10.5, you'd be like, whoa, they only lose one. Like, that's tough to put my money on, but it's like, they got to lose 2. And like most years, I would be like, this is a Utah team that they have lost 2 games in the regular season year after year. But there was a time a few years ago when Utah had a pretty easy regular season schedule. That was in 2019, and they did manage to go 11-1. And just based on looking at this schedule, I feel it's very similar to that. I'm not the only one. And 24/7 released their list of the easiest schedules. Utah was in the top 5 of it. And I think that makes sense based on what's seen here. Now, you do get a tough stretch of the Oklahoma State and then Arizona games back-to-back, but Utah is very good at home. They have yet to lose a game at home since 2018 in which they're like the best quarterback, their starting quarterback was supposed to be there. Like, Oregon Bo Nix, they were very good. But like, it's not like they came in and beat Cam Rising. They still came in and beat Bryson Barnes. There's a huge difference in the play for those guys too. So I think that's something to keep in mind for how it's going to be difficult for Arizona. Arizona, they're not going to look like what we thought they were. They will still be good. Fafita is still there. McMillan is still there. They took some hits because of Jed Fish leaving. So that will leave them a little more vulnerable. Not ideal to have to come to Salt Lake too. Obviously, the Oklahoma State game is the other one you look at where you're like, that could be a loss, and that's the toughest road game. So if you're like, okay, that's where the loss is. I've said before on my prediction, if I had to give a loss right now, because even though I look at these and I like Utah in almost every single matchup, that's just not realistic of how this works. You lose a game you're not supposed to. I actually pegged them to lose the Colorado game just because of how good I think Shedeur Sanders is. I've talked about that a few times. I just don't love that matchup with the top overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft against a still pretty good Utah secondary. But once again, it's not a game Utah should lose, but it's the one I look at them to use. So I do have Utah going 11-1 based on their regular season schedule right now, because there's just not a lot of difficult games on here that I see Kyle Whittingham's squad losing.
Yeah. So like you, the first one that I looked at was Oklahoma State and thought, that one's a little dicey. Same as you, Arizona. I don't know what they're going to be, with a new head coach. You're exactly right. They bring back Fafita and Tetero McMillan, but I don't know, but I feel like you said, I feel good about them being at home. TCU, which TCU team is going to be, is going to show up? Is it going to be the one that got to the national championship game, or is it, I guess 2 seasons ago now, or is it going to be the one that wasn't great last year, and again, it's at home for Utah, so maybe give the edge to Utah there. And then like you, Colorado, never know what Deion's, I don't know. Just like going into his first season, I have no idea what to expect from Deion, and I feel the same way this year. You're exactly right about his son, though. Shedeur is awesome, so we'll see. Iowa State that's another team too. Sometimes they're really good, and sometimes they're pretty not good. So yeah, was that one at home? Yeah, that one. Okay, that one's at home for Utah. Yeah. So and you bring up the point of you kind of always lose one that maybe you should win, and I think kind of vice versa a little bit. So I'm saying at least 2 losses in the regular season, and then so what, that puts you at 10-2, and then that's where that gets dicey. I think another factor that probably needs to be talked about is what's Cam going to be like, is he, and Utah does have a pretty, on paper, a pretty easy, we'll call it, first 3 weeks of the season to maybe get Cam. So maybe by Oklahoma State, he'll be completely, back to whatever, but I still think you don't know what he's going to be like. And so, yeah, I think 2 to 3 losses is maybe fair to think right now. And so that gets you right at that 9.5, that 9.5 number that's pretty zesty when you're thinking about money to put on it or not. So
them and Kansas State are tied with the highest win total odds in this listing, not far behind. UCF is 8.5. That seems really high to me. I like that they brought in KJ Jefferson. I like Gus Malzahn. I know he said that 6 losses is unacceptable, and in the grand scheme of things, I can get behind that. But I mean, they got TCU, Colorado, Florida, Iowa State, BYU, Arizona, Utah, at West Virginia. Like that, I'm very curious to see if they can meet the 8.5 total there too. Some of the other ones, Kansas State, where I said Kansas, but Kansas State there. Kansas is another one. Any guesses on who is tied for the lowest in this, Ryan?
I saw the tweet earlier, and now
shout out Josh Furlong if any of you guys want to take a look at it.
Shout out Josh Furlong. Probably Arizona State and Baylor.
Baylor's 5.5. It's BYU is actually also in there. Sorry, Cougar fans. And then Houston is also in there. And Utah has all 3 of those teams on their schedule while avoiding teams like going to Texas Tech. They don't have to see Kansas or Kansas State. So that's where this favorable schedule matches up for them. But it's going to be interesting. We thought this year they would have a chance to three-peat. That chance was taken away from even really happening when Cam got hurt and Brant never came back. But interesting to see what Utah can do this year. But I think the schedule definitely sets up. So if you guys are looking at that action, remember it was at sportsbook.com that released those odds, and you can head over to them to check them out today. Now, of course, we just talked about Cam Rising, Brant Kuithe, massive pieces to the Utah football team. Those are 2 of the 4 spring captains. That's right. Spring ball is getting closer. Want to talk about who those spring captains were named to be with all of you in one moment. But first, want to talk about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes in our friends at LinkedIn Talent Solutions. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it easy and the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all the winning while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many qualified candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats that they just don't have the time and resources to hire. But that's why LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the hiring process easier. They just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, make the processing time even quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So you can head over and post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Ryan, as spring ball inches closer, we got our release officially of the Utah football spring captain straight from, and if you're like sources, the Utah football athletic count posted it, a graphic with the 4 captains. I think if we all would have said like, okay, who's going to be who, if you had to put all your money on like who one captain was going to be, we put Cam Rising. Kyle Whittingham said he's one of the best leaders I've ever been around. And sure enough, Cam Rising is one of the captains named. Not surprising to see that at all. Also, Brant Kuithe, when you're just talking about his wealth of experience, I think it makes a lot of sense to see him in that spot too. And then defensively, the longest tenured guys that have been really, there's been other players that have been a part of it, but like Karene Reed and Junior Tafuna, I think of those guys so much with both Pac-12 championships, especially Tafuna for being the defensive freshman of the year. Then you look at what just year in and year out, Karene Reed has meant on the interior for the defense. Seems like a really good group of captains and leaders to me, Ryan.
Yeah, for sure. Real quick, not to disrupt. I just realized I'm wearing a blue shirt under here. Sorry, Utah fans. I don't know if Utah knowing
I've done it
fans.
before too. They will say something every once in a while. It's not a ton, but every once in a while you'll get something. So if you do, I'm gonna laugh now.
Yeah, I thought I might get something. So just realized that. But back to the captains. Yeah, I mean, obviously Cam, Brant Kuithe. Yeah. Defense, maybe you'd think it was a little bit interesting that someone like Lander Barton wasn't there, but
Yeah,
he's the quiet leader sort,
Karene's been with the team for longer.
Yeah. And I think the Bartons have always kind of been the quiet, unsung, let's just work, let's kind of lead by example type thing. So, that's just not how he leads is by rah, and so so it makes sense. Yeah, those guys make sense. And Barton's on the leadership council. So yeah, I think those are 4 great captains for 2 on both sides of the ball for sure.
We didn't even talk about that pre-show, Ryan, but what a segue by you as we are about to talk about that leadership council right there. So diving into that a little bit further, we'll talk about Cam Rising as a member of that. Of course, you got the captains still, Cam, Brant, Junior Tafuna, Karene Reed. Lander Barton is a member of that. And man, Lander is just a guy that you could just see how big he is and how well he moves. Like I'm not saying, oh man, I think he's too big. Like, no. He's fine. I just could not imagine as someone who played offensive line in high school. Like I just could never imagine trying to block Lander Barton. And I had to block some decent guys back in the day. Some of those guys even off to the NFL. And there's a reason I'm hosting this podcast and not in the NFL. I didn't do that exactly very well. But Lander's a guy I just would not want to get in front of. Also get Leibani Damuni, wealth of experience from his time at Stanford. Connor O'Toole, been with this team for a long time now too. So I think he has a really good understanding just of what it takes to succeed at Utah. Gone through a position change even. Get some Maya Vaughn on here too. Obviously his wealth of experience at the cornerback spot. Money Parks, the most veteran receiver. Mekhi Bernard, the most veteran running back. Keanu Tanavasa, I've met him on an occasion and just the way he goes after and works. I love his inclusion on this list. And Miki Sugaturaga, the definition of a team guy. He moved the position change from tight end to defensive line was a huge change for him. And I thought there were ups and downs, but I thought he did as good as he could in his first year in that role and really embraced that change as much as he could. So I think this is a really good group and you get a lot of guys with vastly different passing experiences. And I think that's what makes for the best kind of leaders when you get the collaboration amongst everyone who has taken a different path.
Yeah. All those guys who looked, I was like, yep, that one makes sense. I love Mekhi Bernard. Yeah, he just team guy. And I think he's great. Yeah, I think it is it's not just the stars, the stars, it's maybe some guys who you wouldn't think, but clearly I'm sure I'm not in their locker room, but I'm sure some of those guys who maybe aren't the stars on the field are the sort who are strong in the locker room, and so you probably got a good mix of guys in terms of guys who different players can connect with and so forth. So yeah, I think I'm not sure how many programs do this leadership council concept, but I think
I think it's like 67 to be exact, right?
What?
What? I just totally made up a number, Ryan. I'm joking with you.
I was like, oh, he knows. Like that's impressive. I don't know, but I think it's a good idea. I really like the leadership council idea, and beyond just the captains.
I think the communication that Utah seems to have between their staff and players has what's allowed Kyle Whittingham, who is an older coach, just in terms of how long he's one of the most experienced coaches in college football. When you look at when he first became the head coach to now, I think this was allowed him to succeed and thrive. I think Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State's also done a really good job of this, right? When you see guys like TCU, Gary Patterson a couple years ago, his way kind of fell out, and there's tons of other examples of coaches and who haven't been able to adapt. And I know the NIL era, it's crazy and all these other things like that too, but I give a lot of credit to Utah for being able to adapt in this era. I think they've done a good job having different voices included. And I just love that all of these guys have different backgrounds, whether you're a transfer like Cam Rising, you're a low recruit who made yourself into a star like Brant Kuithe, who's been through a lot with this team. You're a high recruit like Lander Barton. You've been with a different program like a Leavani Damuni and experienced success there. Obviously, Cam he was a backup at Texas, didn't experience a lot of success there. Guys who've gone through position changes, guys who came on strong early. I think the one thing that is interesting is just looking at this, there's not an offensive lineman on the list, but all of these guys we know are going to get a lot of playing time. I've said before, I don't think anyone on the offensive line based on last year's performance should have their spot locked down. I think there's lots of guys who should be the front runner for their spots based on their performances, and I expect them to start. But I don't think there's anyone where I'm like, oh, yeah, he's a slam dunk to start at this position on the offensive line versus last year. I knew Keaton Bills and Satao Laumea were going to do that. So it's going to be interesting to see how the spring goes for Utah. But like this group of captains and the leadership council, I think it's in a good space to make sure the spring goes well and is productive, because guys like Spencer Fano, the experience he got in the spring last year were paramount to him having a successful fall camp. And I think it's great that Utah has this group in place. And you're right, Brian. I have no idea how many other schools do it, despite what I may have led on and said earlier. But it is a good thing that I think Utah does as well. And speaking of good things, how about the Utah men's basketball team and what Branden Carlson did tonight? Want to talk about that crazy ending to Utah versus UCLA in one moment. But first, I want to talk to all of you about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes. It's our great friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's capital LNO, no spaces, to shoot your shot. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All-Star Weekend just wrapped up. What a crazy one it was, from Celebrity Game Madness to the dunk contest, controversies endlessly, to All-Star Game itself. Always interesting, the lack of defense and high scoring, but always something to behold. And now the regular season is here, going to be coming to more ramped up. The intensity ramps up, and make sure you guys head over to FanDuel today to check out all of their great NBA offers. Speaking of basketball, Ryan, how about the Utah men's basketball team? We'll talk about the game in total for a second, but Utah wins at 70-69. It's 68-69 with just a few seconds on the clock. Davion Smith drives to the hoop, trying to go coast to coast, and just ends up throwing it off the glass so high, nearly out of bounds. And because of how high it bounced off the glass, Branden Carlson coming in from behind and makes, to what my opinion, is his top play during his time as a running Ute? Would love to hear some of your guys' other nominees. Brand's obviously done great things. Utah's all-time leader in block. How could he not be well accomplished? Scored so many points for the running Utes. But this is the play, the moment. I'm so happy he could add basically a buzzer beater to that. And what a play it was. The hustle, the put back, the W.
Man, like you said it, but everything about it was just huge. The play design was awesome by Craig Smith. Davon Smith to get the down the court that quick, like Carlson to trail behind, like everything was awesome. And it was huge. People, I think probably a lot of the listeners of this show will know the name Parker Van Dyke, but a lot of people were comparing that to his game winner years ago. I don't know how many years ago that would have been now. Against UCLA, he had an awesome game winner several years ago now. And talking big picture, like Utah is at the point where it's kind of must win pretty much every game.
Yes, absolutely.
In terms of their NCAA tournament. And so I wasn't watching the game super close, but I was following it, and it was kind of going back and forth the whole second half. And I'm like, oh, Utah's not going to do this. And this is going to be the end of their NCAA tournament hopes. And, I was thinking all this stuff, and man, just what a huge win all the way around for Utah. It was awesome.
It's a monster win. It's crazy. I'm watching the playback right now, even as we're talking about it. It's a great play drawn up by Craig Smith, like you said, because it gets Davon Smith a layup, and it's just one he can't. And it's also, there's some bad defense by the Bruins. Like, I'm not saying this is all Craig Smith, but this is why UCLA has been as bad as they are on the season too. There's just a million things that's going to cause Cronin to get all red in the face, like he's anger from inside out, as he's tend to do so often throughout his tenure there. But just a case where Carlson's energy and effort were rewarded. And even though Smith missed that layup, still 17 points, 10 assists, a monster day for him. Carlson added 17 of his own. Badgema and Madsen combining for 11 too. Utah not getting a ton from their bench, just 5 from Erickson, but still just once again, Utah finding a way. Shout out Stefanovic for having a pretty good game. The former Ute had 19, 8 of 9 shooting on free throws, but Utah gets it done. They're 16-10 now overall on the season, and they got some winnable games coming up at Colorado. It's not going to be an easy one, but it's one they definitely can, and I believe they should win that one. Then they're going to take on Cal, and then the trip up to Eugene to take on the Ducks. But before that, they'll head to Corvallis to take on Oregon State. Only a few games remaining as the Pac-12 regular season comes to a close. It's going to be a fun conclusion to see how it all plays out for Utah. But this was a huge win, Ryan, and it's just going to be fun to continue to follow along with Utah and see what they can do. Just like I encourage all of you listeners to go and follow along with Ryan at thedeseretnews.com. Also, you can follow his Twitter at Ryan W. McDonald, or his X at Ryan W. McDonald. Ryan, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. We'll be back with you talking all things Utah football and Utah athletics tomorrow. We look forward to seeing you then.